Well, Vincent, my first contact with Father John Lavelle was in 1948, and I was 13 years of age at the time, and my twin brother and I were just straight out on the road there. We were driving sheep to Kim after they'd been shorn, and I remember we had a brand. It was an AZ, which we used tar at the time, and you boil a pot of tar, and then you dip this brand into the tar, and you put that on the side of the sheep. And we were driving the sheep back here, and this priest or this man appeared with the camera, and he took a photograph of the sheep and the two of us, because we were twins as well, driving the sheep back to Kim. And he was a busy photographer. He was using 60 millimeter camera or film, and he concentrated on every church in Acton. When the mass was taking place, and as the people assembled, and hundreds of people on bicycles at that time. There weren't very many cars in 1948, and they assembling at the different churches. And he said mass in different, and certainly he said mass maybe up in Belfast, because I don't think the church was in Cullen at that time, and Bunahari and the different places, and certainly in Pollock. I saw him saying the mass there, and it captured life of that time, 1948, and how people the mode of transport was that. And then there was the odd pony and trap, and I think he captured that part of it as well. And then, of course, any social event that was taking place at the time, he had that. And then that was my memory of Father John Lavelle. And of course, the people were very proud of the fact that he was from Duat, because I don't think we ever had a priest in Duat until the recent one now. This another Father Lavelle. No, well, he's not Father Lavelle, but his mother was Lavelle. No, she was McNamara, but the grandfather, his grandfather was Lavelle. This man that has been ordained Franciscan priest just a fortnight ago. Anyway, Father John Lavelle went back to the States, and then in 1950 he returned again, and his father was with him. And they visited different members of the family, and he captured them on camera. And this John Lavelle had a sister just across the road there. She was Alice Lavelle, and she's the mother of Mary Elizabeth and Nora, God rest her. They were twins, and Ellen Fadgen and Patrick Mack, who died recently, and Tom Mack. They were that family. She was married to a man called Pat Frank McNamara, and it was with her that they stayed at that time. And then, of course, they were visiting all the neighbours and all that kind of thing. And I saw some footage where they visited some relation in Kiel. She was Maud Lavelle. She was where Tim Daly's house is now. She was Maud Lavelle, but she had married a teacher, Master Fadgen from Crumpon, and they had a family there. And I have a vivid memory of this picture taken, and she's out at the gate. She's an oldish woman at that stage, and she's out at the gate saying goodbye to them. And at the time, horse and cart was in vogue, and the county council were obviously improving the roads and using the shingle from Kiel Beach, and there was a pile of shingle drawn or changed up onto the sandy banks, and then it would be taken from there. It was, it was like a depot, and it was a great image. Like when you think of today, where there's hardly a horse, there are only a few ponies, but these were cart horses. All the work was done with the cart horse. So I have a good memory of that. In fact, I had that on it was transferred from the film, the 16mm film, onto a DVD. A little bit now, a little clip. But anyway, Father John, I think he died in a traffic accident at the traffic lights or something, And there was a sister of John Lavelle married at the Sound. She was Helen, I think was her name, and she was married to a Sweeney man. And they had a daughter who married Michael Brett. He was working in Sweeney's, and then the Brett family, there where the Brett Stores is there at the Sound. That's where they lived, and of course, the priest and they used to visit out there. So when he died, I spoke to Imelda Brett. Well, she's Imelda McGowan now, but she was Imelda Brett originally. And I said, Imelda, all that film is going to be lost unless somebody makes an approach. So she contacted the family in America, and all these cans with the film were sent back. Must have been in an attic or something, and Imelda gave them to me for safekeeping, and that's a good many years ago now, and I always intended having it transferred onto a video, or a DVD. So I had been in touch with the Film Institute in Dublin, and they were prepared to master tape the thing and clean them up, and provided they were allowed to keep a copy of those old photographs, because they would be priceless in a sense, of that time from 1948, 49, 50, that time. Now, I'm not sure whether all of the material in these cans is of Ireland. There may be some of Cleveland, but even if it were the case that a lot of them are in Cleveland, they will be associated with churches where active people would be attending. So it's still a precious material to have, and depending on the condition they're in, we don't know what condition they're in and what can be restored. So that was then in he had died and we got the film back. But in 1950, I have a vivid memory of talking to John Lavelle and the priest. Even though I was only in 1950 I was 15 years of age, but they were always anxious to meet anybody that had any relation, and John Lavelle's mother and my grandmother were sisters. They were the Anthonys. Bridget, John's mother was Bridget Anthony O'Malley. He was Anthony O'Malley, and he was married to a Bridget Lavelle, and she was a red-haired woman, and he was the son of a Breen Moore O'Malley, who came from either Roona or Slinehead to fish in Leck, just over there in Dua, and he met a woman called Mary Mannion, and that's where that line started. And then they had this son Anthony, and Anthony had these girls, Bridget, Honor, Moya Rua. She was red-haired, so she was called Moya Rua. There were three of them anyway. And I think the generation before that, from Breen Moore, there was one of the girls of that family went and married in Curran to a Joe O'Malley, and he had a son called, and they called him Joe Bawn, and he used to come down here and build houses and that kind of stuff. So he was cousins to all these O'Malleys, and then he had a son who was called Josie Joe Wan in Curran, and you know. There's a Mary O'Malley. She's married to Patrick McGinty, and one of them is married to John Dennis from Pollock, and there's a Sheila, and there's a whole big family of those, the Josie Joe Wans, and their brother died just a couple of years ago. So there's a line stretching out to Curran there, and then some of those went to America again, out to Cleveland, and you know, it goes on and on. Now. These sisters, I'm coming back to the three sisters again. They had a brother, Charles O'Malley, and he was my great grandfather, and he died at the age of 45 on a Christmas day, leaving a family of 9, and they were known as the Charlies: Anthony Charlie, Pat Charlie, Mary Charlie, Charles Charlie, Michael Charlie. They're 4 lads, and then there were 5 girls: Mary Charlie and Catty Charlie and Biddy Charlie and Alice Charlie, who went to America, and Honor Charlie. They were the 5, and they were left as orphans. And Anthony the pub, they called him afterwards because he bought pubs, but he told me himself that when his father died, he was the eldest of the family, and he said, these are his words, he said, I was thrashing a little stacking rye back in the stable, and the parish priest came in from the sound on horseback, and he came into the stable, and he took into the stable, I should say, and he took the sheaf out of my hand, and he gave it 3 raps on the stone. And he said to me, you'll never see a poorer day. And I never looked back. So Anthony went to Scotland, and he became a gaffer, and he came back a few years later with the price of what's called Alice's at the Sound, that hotel, in belt and gold sovereigns around his waist, and he came on the train to the Sound. So he had just across the road. Then he bought the pub in Dwa, and he had 7 in family, and he contributed hugely to the purchase of a house for all of them. That's Anthony. Now all of the family did well. My own grandfather was Pat Charlie, and he had 7 in family. My mother was Catty Pat Charlie, and you know, that's the way they're, and Thomas Pat Charlie. You know, they just to distinguish between all the majors. They live beside your grandmother's house. They are almost beside, 2 doors from your grandmother's house. That was the Pat Charlie, and there was a Mary Charlie. When the father died, she was 3 years of age, and the mother was a McAndrew. She was Catherine McAndrew. She came from Donever, but originally from the Erris area. And when her husband died, she woke up in the morning, he was dead in the bed beside her at a young age. So she had a brother, Tom McAndrew, in Donever, and he carried Mary Charlie, this 3-year-old, down on his back to Donever, and she spent 3 or 4 years down there before she returned to her mother. And she never forgot that, because when she was going to die, I was in the house when it came towards the end, and the homing instinct was clear. She was saying, I want to go home, take me home. And her daughter Slim would say, sure, aren't you at home? No, I want to go home. Do you want to go to Kil West? No, I want to go to Donever. Where she was as a child. You see, the homing instinct back to where you were born or your early years. So they did remarkably well, all the family. They all did well. That Charles Maid's family. Charles, the brother of Bridget, who is the person we're now investigating, the mother of John P. Lavelle, great grandfather of is it Rose Lavelle, this footballer, and that was his mother. John Pat Lavelle's mother was the Bridget O'Malley, and his father was Patsy Lavelle, and he had his son. One of his sons was called Patsy, because he was, and he worked on the railway in Canada. He lived just below your granny's house. You know that little turn there, and he had a house there. He married a lady called Maggie Sweeney from Upper Ackland, had no family, but he was called Pat the Roundhouse because of the connection with the station in Canada. He worked on the Red Line in Canada. And then there was another one of them, Michael Lavelle, a brother of John Pat, and he became a policeman. He was in the RIC and in England, and he was a character. He was nicknamed the Cop. Everybody knew him as the Cop. He married a lady called Julia from Cork, and they had one son, Michael, and he ended up, I think, yes he did. He died over in Corby with his son, and Julia, the Cork woman, was buried in Slumhove. So that's another link with the family, and it goes on and on and on. Now, the Moya Rua, she married another sister of the Bridget. She married a man called Johnny Geelty, and he had 9 in family. And these Geeltys now, Geelty's pub and that, their father was, or their grandfather was Anthony Geelty, one of that line. So they all descended from Moya Rua, and then Josie Geelty married Mikey O'Malley in Keele, and that's where Kieran O'Malley and another line starts there. So it's endless. And Joe Mulligan, they had a big family. The next generation, Cathy Geelty had a big family as well. So that she was the daughter of Moya Rua and Johnny Geelty. So it's a big line of people, I don't know if there's much more I could say on the genealogy aspect of things. I probably could, and I'm probably leaving some things out there.
Well, their home house in Dwa, do you know where that was?
Oh yes, that was the home house. It was Patsy Lavelle's. It was just down that little slope from your granny's house, which is now white water, I think they call it. And it was just down around the slope there. And I do know that Ihe Naguihamora, they had a thatched house, and the cattle would be either in the house or beside it. There might have been an Nathan and she, but the house was demolished, and the horse and the cattle were killed. It was just across the road, across the river from Anthony Mickey's place, and Anthony Mickey told me that. So that was 1839, in Ogehamora, and then they improved the house a bit, and then Alice was their daughter, like a sister to the John P. Lavelle, and she married a man called Pat McNamara Frank, and she lived across the road here. And Patsy, now I have this from Ellen Fadgen. Patsy came back to live here, just across in that house there, before he died. And Ellen was a little girl, and she recalls seeing a man from Tonrigee called Michael O'Malley, Michael Charlie, standing with his back to the fire in the room at Patsy's wake, singing a song. So there's another piece of the tradition. So it is a very interesting story, the whole lot, and of course, as happens with families, they go to America and they're close contacts for a while, and then it gradually fades. As well, to an extent, this would have happened to this family, and now with this breaking news, with this Rose Lavelle and the football, it has come to the fore again. Now, there are a couple of aspects of it that, other aspects of the story. In 1910, Paul Henry came here, and he was very friendly with my grandfather, who was Johnny Timon, and was married to Honor Anthony. And Paul Henry sketched Honor Anthony and her sister Bridget, and that is the famous painting called the Potato Diggers. I have it in there. I have a copy of it inside my room. I wish I had the original, but the original is in the National Gallery in Dublin, the Potato Diggers of Achill, and of National Gallery fame. So that's another aspect of it. I come to John Lavelle when they were leaving, John Lavelle and his father, and I came down just beside the Bill's Rock, which is this side of Rudy's pub, and I came down that road, and I was 15 in 1950, and I just witnessed something, that the bus garage and the bus station was just beside the pub, across the pub, and I witnessed John P. Lavelle and the priest, and John P. Lavelle was backing towards the bus station. It was a good couple of 100 yards, and he had his back towards where the bus was, but he was looking back. He was taking the last look. And I told that story to a lady called Terry Hassett. She does a bit of writing, and she wrote a story called Lavelle's Last Look, taking the last look at his native place. So that's another element to it. There was the painting of those two. So it just goes on and on.
It's very good, very interesting story.
Oh, it is. It's a massive, and as well as that, Vincent, they were all big families. My father's mother was Honor Anthony, sister to this Bridget. They were males, and my father had 51 first cousins in Duach when he was a young lad, around the 40s, and just before that, 51 first cousins. Most of them were that line, and then on the other hand the McNamaras, and they were big families, So this really has a lot of, I mean, the tree has branched out since then, and this lady has an awful lot of relatives in Achill, in Duach. Now I'm just talking about Duach. of course, we're not to leave and forget that the mother, Nora, came from Kiel, and my son is married to a girl called Catherine McNamara. Her mother was Anne Lavelle, and that's that line of the family. So you'll have to get the details of that from the Lavelles of Kiel and the Cafferkys of Kiel and the McNamaras of Kiel. There's a big branch there as well. So I think is that the main thing. I might be forgetting something now. Well, no, you have the bit about Chuck Lavelle playing for the Cleveland. Well, that was our information that he was playing for the Cleveland Browns. So we'll have to see how if there's any of this film worth retrieving, and if it is, it will be very interesting. Particularly, it would demonstrate what life was like in 1948, and that's quite a long time ago now. Many years since 1948. It's about 70, is it? It is 70 because I'm 84.
Yeah, very good.
So I was only 13 then.
Uh-huh. So if Rose is watching this, if you want to send a message over to Cincinnati, to the Lavelle family, 4 generations down from our great grandfather, John P. Lavelle, that you seen getting on the bus leaving Dua.
Well, it would be that she's my distant cousin, and we are very, very proud. Everybody in Achill is very, very proud of her achievement, and of course, very few people were aware that she was a member of the USA team. They knew that they saw this Lavelle name, but they weren't sure what it was, and then. Wasn't it you got some communication from America?
I made communications with her sister Mary.
Yes.
Who sent me on her family tree.
Yes.
And from there, it's just been a fascinating story unravelling before us.
It is indeed, and the first thing I thought that hit me was when she was an athlete. Was that there had to be some connection with Chuck Lavelle, and of course I said that Charles, because John Lavelle's mother's brother was Charles. They were known as the Charlies. So he was Charles Lavelle, and that's where the Chuck comes in. So you see the names even fly out. Now another aspect to it is that just across the stream there, Aunawalia, that famous name that your uncle has on his house, Aunawalia, the river of the village river, which supplied the water for the domestic scene in Dua. Just across the stream from there was a man called Big Charlie O'Malley, and he was an uncle to the Bridget, right? He was a brother to the Anthony, you see, and he was married to a Bridget O'Donnell, and they had 2 in family, Anthony Charles and Michael, and their mother was a Bridget O'Donnell, I understand, and she died. And they grew up to be 2 big, strong men. It was said that they could pull a horse cart, no bother, they were strong men. So then a few years passed, and there was a widow woman in Dua. She was called Biddy Salmon. So she originated in Newport, and she was married to a McHugh man, and she had 4 in family. So what happens? Big Charlie took her in, and they got married, along with the 4 children. So it was getting a bit crowded in the thatched cabin at that stage, and the 2 boys took off in the 1870s, and they were never heard of until 1984, when the granddaughter of Anthony Charles arrived from Chicago, and I was in the house. It wasn't the same house. It was just beside. It was beside this, which was the original thatched cottage. There's plenty photographs of it, and I was in the new house, new little cottage it is, and the knock was on the door, and this lady said, "I say, is this where Big Charlie O'Malley lived?" And Anthony Mickey, who was a distant cousin of hers, he said, "Right here." That was 1984. Anthony died in 1985, and when Patricia, she was Murphy. She had married Murphy, and she had a son with her. Forget his name now, but I think it might have been Patrick Murphy or that. But she came back about 9 years later, and she was telling us about her aunt Alice, who was a stage singer in America, the daughter of Anthony Charles, and she was on the stage with Jack Binney at that time, and she said, well, she's at an advanced age and I am caring for her. So she went back to the States, and Anthony Mickey died in 1985, and then a few years later she came back, and I said to her, well, Patricia, Anthony Mickey left all his money to the church, and he left his cottage and a piece of land to me, because we were double cousins. We were cousins on both sides, you see, because of the Charles and the Honor Anthony, like the McNamara and on O'Malley side. And she said, well, it must be a family trait. Wait till I tell you what happened to my Aunt Alice. The Bishop of Chicago wanted to install a new organ in the Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago, and he went to visit people who had a few pounds, looking for a donation of maybe $1,000. So he came to my Aunt Alice. She was Alice Ruth O'Malley, and then she had married a Robinson. But anyway, he came to her, and she said, you go right ahead and install the organ, and I'll pay for it. And on her 102nd birthday, there were 2,000 people in the cathedral, and this Dutch organ was unveiled, and she was hoisted up at the age of 102 to the gallery, and there was a plaque in that cathedral for a donation. It was only $500,000, $500,000 from the lady whose father came out from under the thatch in Duacha, Achill Island. So that's something to be proud of. And of course, that Anthony Charles was a first cousin to John P. Lavelle. So if Rose is in Chicago, she might visit the Holy Name Cathedral, and she'll find there the organ that was donated by her father's first cousin, the daughter of her father's first cousin, So it's worldwide links. So Sinead,